In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an old beat up door frame look new again. For this tutorial, you will need a paintbrush and paint, some wood filler, possibly a hammer and nail punch, and a sanding sponge, some latex caulking, and some masking tape. First step, take your sanding sponge and sand the entire door trim around. This is to remove any glossiness from previous paint. Next step, hammer in all the nail heads if you have any, using the punch and the hammer. You want to hammer the heads in until just past flush with the frame. Next step, if you have heavy paint runs from the previous paint job, you can scrape them off with something like a spackle knife. In this next step, it's time to patch all of the damage in the door frame. I'm going to demonstrate how to patch the different type of damages, including dents like this, scratches and gouges, and any holes that might be there. This first type, I'm going to patch this big dented area right here. So I'm going to get the wood filler and lightly fill it in right here. Then with a spackle knife, I'm going to come right here since the trim is curved this way. And I'm just going to lightly go across like this. I'm very lightly pressing down on the spackle knife. You don't want to wipe the wood filler away. For holes, just fill it in a little bit and lightly wipe it. For all of these nicks and gouges in the corners, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a light layer of wood filler going across it, and I'm going to go like this and just wrap the spackle knife around to fill in the damage. This is much easier to fix on the flat sides because all you need to do is rub the spackle knife along it. So I'm just going to fill in any deep areas. For the damaged corners, I'm going to wipe a lot of filler there and just come across like that. Now just continue to go around the frame, filling all of the damage. Filled in all the damage, just let it dry. Once the wood filler has dried, it's time to sand it off. So I'm going to get my sanding sponge and lightly move across it. You don't want to press too hard on the sanding sponge because it'll dig out the wood filler. Since it's softer than the wood around it, it'll create noticeable valleys where the hole was. So just lightly move across. For the corners, you can put your sanding sponge like this, create a nice edge. The next step is to fill all of the gaps within the trim. To do this, I'm going to wet my finger on a sponge so it's lubricated. I'm going to get the caulking gun and run a bead along this gap right here. Fill in any areas that missed. Now I'm going to take my finger and lightly apply pressure and move it across, pushing the caulking into the crack. I'm going to do the same for this area. And also where the trim meets at this 45-degree angle. Now just do this anywhere there's a big gap within the trim. At this point, I would also suggest filling in any gaps if your door meets against drywall like this. Once you have put caulking in all the gaps, let it dry. Next step, vacuum on and around the entire perimeter of the frame. The next step depends on whether you want to paint the wall next to it after you're done painting the trim, or you want to keep the same color and don't want to mess with it. I'm going to show you the steps to take if you want to keep the color of the wall and don't plan on repainting it. So first step is to get the masking tape and put it roughly 1/8 of an inch away from the trim directly onto the drywall. You don't need to press down right here because you're going to be peeling it up anyways. You can see there's roughly 1/8 of an inch gap away from the trim. Next step, get your caulking gun and run a bead in this little gap you created. You don't need too much. Then wet your finger and run it along it like this. All you're wanting to do is push the caulking directly underneath the tape to create a nice seal between it and the drywall. So here's a close-up like this. It's just barely overlapping the end of the tape. That way paint cannot get through the caulking and tape and end up on your wall. So do this around the entire perimeter of the trim where the trim meets the drywall. As soon as you're done applying caulking, when it's still wet, get your paintbrush. When you get to painting the caulking, I load with the paintbrush like this and lightly dab it in here. You don't want to wipe the caulking away and get it on your paintbrush. I'm just dabbing the paint onto it like this. Then, once it's dabbed on there, I'm going to run the paintbrush across it like this to make it smooth. Now as soon as you're done painting the door trim, when the caulking and paint is still wet, remove the tape. You want to start it and keep it pulled out like this, always being ahead of where it's being removed. Be very careful that as you're peeling the tape off, the excess tape doesn't touch the wet paint. As you can see, you have a perfectly straight line where you remove that paint. Once you have removed the tape, all you need to do is let the trim dry and you are done. If you do paint in the drywall after painting the trim, you can just completely paint over everything. It doesn't matter if you brush up against the drywall. See my paint trimming video where I go into more detail about how to get a brush-free finish. Once you painted the entire door frame, all you need to do is let it dry. Then you can do your cut-ins on the sides. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe.